What's going on, everybody? And welcome into the 83rd episode of the CRZY podcast. As always, I'm your host, Stephen Gates, and this is the show where we talk about creativity, leadership, design, and everything else that helps to empower creative people. Now, be sure to subscribe to the show to get those latest episodes whenever they come out, and when you're over there on your favorite podcast platform, take just a second, click those stars, leave a review to let people know what you think. You can always listen to all the shows, get the show notes, and so much more. Just head over to the CRZY. That's the CRZY and the number 1.com. And with episode 83, we return to more of the traditional format. I know that for the last two episodes, we did the replays of the two sessions I did from How. Did that because, well, first and foremost, it was just content that I was really proud of and wanted to share that because I thought there was a lot of really good stuff there. But also, I think if you listen to episode 80, the one that I did on confidence, that show, I'll be honest, I think I kind of needed a little bit of a mental break after that one. I don't know that a show has been more emotionally raw for me. I don't know that a show has been, taken more out of me than I felt like that one did. But the interesting thing was coming out of that, and kind of especially with Oogie is my dog who went blind, a lot of people have reached out. That has been an amazing couple of weeks. I think partially because she has continued to prove to all of us that she's got this and we shouldn't need to worry about it. And so days like today, whenever I say, hey, Oogie, you want to go to work? She charges up the stairs and heads into my office, and you would never know she was blind. But I think it was a good reminder for me because I think it's interesting. I've heard friends who've sort of gone through these moments of crisis in their life. One friend in particular who had something happen with her daughter who said in the moment whenever it happened, she actually forgot how to dial 911. And while it wasn't that bad for me, I kind of felt like it was a little bit of that moment where I needed to remember who I was. I needed to stop and think that I'm a designer. And as a designer, what better way to tackle whenever life hands you a big problem than to actually apply design to it? And so having a dog that was blind, just approach it like a design challenge. And so it's been a really fun, actually, exercise to be able to work with her, to be able to use things like texture and sound and smell to completely redesign our house and watch her respond to that. And it's been a really great experience. But I guess first and foremost, just want to say thank you to everybody who's reached out. It meant a ton. She's here with me and she is doing amazing. But also wanted to welcome what I think is a substantial amount of new listeners, thanks to my appearance on Debbie Millman's Design Matters podcast. It was a really fun thing to be able to do. If you haven't had a chance to check out that episode or just had to check out the series in general, Debbie is the originator. She is the best. She's the reason why this actually isn't an interview show, because I just thought about that and thought I probably can't ever do it better than that. So to all of you who are new to the show, who've been catching up and binging and reaching out and stuff like that, welcome. But for this episode, we want to return to probably a very well-trod subject on this show, which is leadership. And you know what? I've talked about this a lot, but I've also sort of talked about that whenever I do this show. One of the things about this show is that I'm sort of learning at the same pace as everybody else. And the reason why I want to revisit this is because leadership really remains the number one topic I coach people on, number one topic people ask me about. And I think this show is a little bit different take on the topic than what I've done before. Mainly just because over the last year and a half, I've had the chance to do a lot of thinking about leadership. And, in a lot of cases, and I think especially coming out of that episode on confidence, I think that leadership can be something that actually, interestingly enough, can erode your confidence. So in this episode, I want to take a little bit of a different look at it. And I want to look at sort of what are the different levels of leadership, what are the different styles of leadership, and also just what are the different styles of communication. And honestly, I think that, one of the biggest things that I've learned in terms of coaching people is that in the past, just sort of talking about something aspirationally, talking about something informationally is great. But the thing that I've really learned in working with companies and in coaching a lot of people is that it needs to be more than that. You need to also have a structure. You need to have be able to way to really look at the maturity, to understand where somebody is, to then start coaching them from there. And I think the other thing around leadership has also been that I think the lack of a fit between a leader's style and the style of the company or the style of your boss is a really big and very consistent reason why there is so much kind of organizational dysfunction and executive failure. I think that was part of some of the troubles that I've had as I look back over my career. And it's one of those things where I just, again, I want to look at this a little bit differently, maybe a little bit more analytically than what we've done in the past. But The other thing is whenever I think about this stuff, and especially with a few weeks to sort of step back from the show, take a little bit of a minute to think about this. The other thing for me has been to really start to think about, okay, this is a really complicated topic. So how do we once again sort of break this down into something everybody can relate to? And this has been difficult, right? Because I think especially leadership can be so nebulous, it can be so different. How do you do that? And, this may sound a bit funny, and you may think that, what, Gates is finally, the crazies maybe really officially sort of set in. But I think that the best way that I can think that sum up the way that people treat creative leaders is pepper. Not like bell pepper, like pepper the spice. And stick with me on this. Don't hit stop just yet, right? So let's think about this, right? So you're going to go out and you're going to go to a nice restaurant. And, it's one of those things where you decide that, you're going to order like a soup or a salad because, maybe you're feeling a bit more hungry than usual. And you and whoever it is you're there with, right, you're sort of making small talk, and before long, that soup or that salad appears there on the table. Then a really, really interesting thing happens. And it's an interesting thing that has driven me absolutely crazy for years. So you're sitting there, food in front of you. Now, before you can even pick up the fork or pick up the spoon, your waiter or waitress appears with a pepper grinder and says, hey, would you like some pepper? And the thing that I've also found is that, probably the more, I don't know what, the harder the restaurant is trying, the larger the pepper grinder becomes, to the point where in some it becomes almost like comically large. But let's take a pause right there and let's think about this. So you've gone to a restaurant to eat food prepared by a professional chef and their staff. This would assume that they know what they're doing. And it would also assume that in this particular case, that if you know what you're doing, they would have seasoned the food correctly. So for me, the very question of do you want pepper really sort of undermines all that professionalism. Because at its core, it assumes that the chef didn't do his job, right? It assumes that food is not seasoned correctly, that, it really doesn't, it's that they don't know what they're doing. And you are being asked to make a judgment call with no reference point, right? You haven't tried the food. You haven't tried the soup. Maybe it's perfect, right? Maybe they brought it out and it's exactly right. Maybe it's got too much pepper. Maybe it doesn't have enough. But you don't know. But it's in that moment, whenever you're making an assumption, that to me, like, that just feels like such an average day in the life of a creative leader, right? You cook the best dish you can, only to have your audience judge it with no reference point, no understanding of the decisions you made, and in too many cases, probably undermined by the team you work with. And whenever that decision is being made, whenever your work is actually being consumed, you're nowhere to be seen. Now, I don't say this to be bitter, to be overly dramatic, but I think that whenever I talk with creative leaders every week who are sort of at their end of the rope because everyone is trying to put pepper on their work, right? Because I think that's really the hard part in being a leader, is that, whatever the byproduct is, whatever the product of the entire team is usually assigned to you. You are the one who usually gets the glory or the blame, usually disproportionately on both. And the thing is that whenever we think about leadership, and especially whenever I've been talking to so many people about this, look, we can't control everybody else, right? But we can acknowledge that these problems exist. We can talk about them, and we can try to improve our leadership. And because I think that's part of it for me as we sort of set off on this conversation, is that there's always going to be some part of leadership that you cannot control, right? You can't control the people around you. You can't control your consumers. You can't control there are so many different variables that are kind of always moving. So the only thing you can really control, the only thing you can really concentrate on is you. So let's start there. And what I want to do is actually start with the real basics and a real simple framework for how do we look at and how do we think about where your leadership is. And I want to do that because I want to start by making sure we all understand that there are different maturity levels to leadership, right? And now we've talked about this at Envision. We published a big study about the state of maturity for design organizations. Leadership has a similar sort of design maturity model. And I think over the past year and a half, I've really become increasingly interested in these ways of measuring maturity in people and organizations. And the thing with this is that whenever we talk about this stuff, this is never about judgment, right? But I think for me, it's rather a necessity that if you're going to be able to coach or teach someone effectively, you need to be able to benchmark where they're at. And I think you also then need to be able to say, what are the things you should work on next? So that if it's a 5-tiered model and you're at level 1, then no, you should not be working on the things that are going to come in level 5. You should be working on level 2. So there's an order and a way of going about this that actually becomes productive. Because whenever you try to jump the shark, you make those leaps that are too big, then you run into problems. So the 5 levels, whenever we're going to talk about leadership, the 5 levels are going to be title, permission, results, people development, and respect. And we're going to go into these all in a lot more depth. But here's the thing, is that, as we go through the details of each of these levels, I want you to think about which one of these apply to you and assign a level to yourself as we go through and sort of get to the end of every one of these descriptions. Now, if you're really serious about this process, then the other thing that I would have you do would also be to ask people on your team, ask coworkers, ask other people like that, where they think you sit as well. Because the interesting part about leadership, the interesting part about a lot of creativity is that often you are your own biggest blind spot, right? The way that you think you are, the way that you think you act, the way that you think you portray yourself to the world, well, maybe that's accurate and maybe it's not. But this way of sort of figuring out if you think, you're a level 5 and everybody else thinks you're a 2, you've got some serious self-reflection to do to figure out why there's a difference there. But let's jump into these 5 different levels. Now, level 1. This one was the one that I said was title. And this is the level that is the entry level, the very basement of leadership. And this is where people follow you because they have to, right? And that's why this is the starting point for leadership. Anybody can be appointed to leadership. So that this level honestly tells you pretty much nothing about the person's leadership qualities. And at this level, the leader honestly is barely able to influence other people. And in many cases, the easiest way to pick out people like this is they use their job title to get things done. They will say, well, I'm a VP, I'm a head creative director, I'm like whatever that is, right? Like somehow that's the justification for why you need to listen to them. And this goes back to a problem that we've been talking about really over the arc of this entire show, that just because you're really good at execution, just because you're a great designer, a great copywriter, a great engineer, a great product person, whatever that is, does not mean that you have any of the qualifications to actually be a good, let alone a really effective, let alone a respected leader. And that's what you'll sort of see in this place, is that whenever you come in with very little experience, as you're going from how do I figure out whenever it was just me and just my work, how do I start to lead other people? That's where you come into this level 1, this title level, because that's the point where, again, you're just going to use your title to try to get things done. Now from there, as we get to level 2 is much more about permission. And permission is a place where people will actually follow you. You become a leader because people actually want to be on your team. And this level is really a lot more about like human relationships. And it's about the relationships that you built with the people around you. Because the interesting thing is that whenever you start to look at teams like this, part of the motivation comes from the team, right? Like they motivate themselves. But it's also a result of the fact that the leader believes in them. Because it's that belief, that investment, the fact that the person has actually sat down and invested enough in them and said, look, I believe in you, and they understand what the processes are, that really helps drive results. And again, I think it's this other thing where, the team then will also start to invest in and believe in whatever that leader is really trying to get done, right? Like, what are their goals? What are they trying to strive for? They're going to then come in and try to help accomplish those. Because again, there starts to become this two-way investment as each side really wants to be there. Now, as we get to sort of the middle level on this, level 3 then starts to become about results. Because, 1 is just you're there because somebody gave you the job. 2 is that the people actually start to believe that you should be in that job and you start to believe in them. And then the next result of that is level 3, which is then about results. And that's people follow you because of what you've done for the organization. And that's at the point, because whenever you're investing in people, it's such a necessary step. And I think a lot of people get 2 and 3 flipped, where they try to drive results before they invest in their people. And it just doesn't work that way. Results comes in the middle, because that's the case where at this point, now the team is starting to believe they're starting to achieve their goals, and we can get measurable, goals, measurable achievements underneath that leader. And the fact that this level kind of comes after, in that building those interpersonal relationships has to do with the fact that, especially if you're working at in-house, especially if you're working on creative work, your colleagues and your, team members are vital to achieving good results. that it's only when the team can work together, whenever they can believe in one another, whenever they can trust in each other, that it's actually possible to get results. If you just push for results before you actually have those personal relationships, then you'll tend to slide back down to one where, then again, the only way I'm going to get results is by sort of threatening people's jobs, by saying, look, I have to get this done, but you're not investing in them. They're not investing in you. Nobody believes in much of anything. And that's when the whole thing really kind of starts to fall apart. Now, 4 is for people development. And this is where people follow you because of what you have done for them. Now, you may start to be wondering, like, what's the difference between permission and people development? So what's the difference between 2 and 4? 2 is just really belief, right? Like, I believe in you. We're going to work towards a common end. We start to see things, the same sort of way. 4 is about whenever I start to genuinely invest in people. This is whenever I'm really about how do I develop people on my team? How do I develop and do it sincerely, right? Because it's essential for any growing organization that you have leaders that are at this 4th level. Because if not, you're really going to struggle. But this is also whenever you'll start to actually watch leadership really start to come into their own. Because whenever you get to people development, this is where you're going to start to watch that leader delegate their work to their team. And the interesting thing is that whenever you start to delegate, which even may feel like it is skinning you alive, that whenever you start to do that, it starts to give the team confidence. It starts to empower them. And those things will then start to really develop those people. Will start to develop the team in a really significant way. Now, this has to be genuine, right? And it has to be communicated really clearly to those employees. Because if all you're going to do is, and, I'm sorry if there are HR people out there, if all generally you're going to do is just recite whatever the HR development, units are that they told you to go through, this is not genuinely investing in your people, especially when it comes to creatives, right? Because our process is different than everybody else. Our hangups are bigger than everybody else. Our insecurities are bigger than everybody else. So that just sort of going through and treating this like it's some sort of cookie cutter approach to developing people doesn't work. The way that leadership works best is whenever you understand that people's processes are different. Embrace those differences. Lean into them. Understand that that's the strength and not the weakness. And that those are the things that are really going to then make the team different and better. And that's going to be why it's really important. And then that's going to lead you to that 5th level. And the 5th level is respect. And this is that level where people follow you because of who you are and what you represent. Because they understand you as a person. They don't understand you as talk. They don't understand you. They understand that whatever it is you do, you are really, really sincere about. But the other part of this is that at every one of these stages, this is a two-way street, right? Because again, whenever we talk about respect, it is based on a foundation of respect. Your employees, your team members, and your colleagues really appreciate because they see you as an example, right? It's about the leader who is, honestly, the best way that I know to be able to figure out somebody who's at a level 5 is look at the way they're talked about after they're gone. Because if this is somebody who sort of remains in the team's thoughts, if it's somebody that they will continue to talk about, continue to reference, even after they leave, where they sort of live on in that kind of like legendary status, right? Like those are people that have gotten to level 5. But the other part of this is that both sides have to continue to invest in that respect the entire way through this process. If at any point one side decides that they're going to go mute, that they're going to fake that respect, that they're not going to give honest feedback, that they're not going to be able to do that, and that's true on the leadership side, but it's also true on the team side, this whole thing falls apart. And this is another reason why leadership becomes so difficult. Because if your team is not being authentic, if your team is not also leaning into this and being open to this, then getting to those higher levels becomes extremely, extremely hard and becomes much more fraught with problems and can become much more fraught with failure. But those are those sort of levels, right? So I want you to think about, where do you think you're at in that? Where do you think you are? How does your team think about you? And then again, if you're feeling really brave, go out and ask them what they think about you. Go out and ask them, what do they think it's like to be able to work for you? Where do you think you are versus where they think you are? And look and see how closely those two are aligned. So that's the starting point. And the 3 sort of sections we're going to go through today, I think it's always good to sort of start with that baseline of maturity, that baseline of understanding just sort of where are we at? Where am I in this process? Because the other part of this is as you start to get into leadership style and communication style, a lot of this is predicated that you are sort of in the middle to upper levels of this. Because if you're just in that level 1 where people follow you because they have to, if it's just, the beginning part of being able to build that relationship with people, overlaying leadership style and communication style on top of that, you can definitely do it. But you also, at those points, are just dealing with kind of much more fundamental things that if you start to cloud it with too much, if you start to put too many things in play at once, then it all starts to get just a little bit too complicated. But now we're going to sort of talk about leadership style. Because I think as you work with people, you start to see these really interesting recurring styles that influence a leader's kind of effectiveness and how are they seen inside of an organization. And, I think that that's the thing, right? Is whenever we went and did the episode on building your personal brand, we did an archetype exercise where I went through and said, like, look, there are a lot of these different archetypes. I want you to go through and kind of think about which one of these you are. I would say let's maybe try to do a similar thing here. Because here again, I think, you can be and maybe one probably dominant one of these, and then maybe one or two more that are sort of supporting styles to this. Because again, people aren't just one-dimensional, but you tend to be dominant on one of them. So the best way that I know to do it is as we go through this, or I'll throw it up in the show notes, like take that out, print it out, cut it up into cards, and actually do a card sort to see which one of these you are. Now, the other part of this is that there's some nuance to these, but there are sort of 5 big groups of whenever we think about leadership style, like they're basically people who basically show up in 5 different ways. Now, those are going to be order, action, relationship, change, and creativity. Because generally, those are the different types of leaders. And whenever you think about no matter what sort of organization I work with, no matter what industry they're in, again, these are the ones that you'll start to see. Now, there are 2 different types in order, 2 different types in action, 1 in relationship, 2 in change, and 1 in creativity. Now, let's go through all of these. Now, the first one in order. This is someone who is a change catalyst. And this is somebody who leadership is really about a turnaround activity, right? These are the people that love a mess. They are the masters of re-engineering, of creating new organizational blueprints. They're really at their best whenever they're in that sort of like turnaround activity mode. That if it's just the status quo, if it's just business as usual, this is not where this person wants to be. They want the mess. They want the thing that is broken. They want to get in there and they want to fix it. That's really when you look at a change catalyst. Now, the other part of order is someone who is a processor. And a processor is somebody where leadership is an exercise in efficiency. And, you look at like organizations, they really want them to be these smooth, well-oiled, just running machines, right? Like they're really efficient at setting up structures and systems that need some sort of support or some sort of objective. And so that's sort of the 2 different halves of order, right? Like the change catalyst is all about how do I find order out of chaos? And the processor is about, okay, now that there is a blueprint, how do I refine it? How do I clean it up? How do I make it more efficient? That this is not about new. This is not about change. This is really about the optimization of what's there. And so those are kind of the 2 different halves of really that's what sort of order style are going to be. Now, as we get into action here again has 2. The first one in action is going to be the transactor. And there are people where leadership is really about deal making, right? Like these people are great deal makers. They are super skilled at identifying and tackling those new opportunities. And for them, it's all about negotiation. It's about how do I get in there and work with my other teammates? How do I work with other silos? How do I work with other companies, right? Like they constantly are going out and cutting deals. They're constantly trying to figure out how do I create partnerships with other people? And that's really their focus. And because for them, they often will sometimes struggle with how do they actually work with, kind of their own team, because in many cases, that's what I said, like for them, it's always about a deal. How do we get this done? How do we do that kind of wheeler dealer sort of thing? Now, the other part of action is then a builder. And a builder is really somebody where leadership is more of an entrepreneurial activity, right? And this is where instead of going out and cutting deals, these are people that really dream of creating something. And they've got the talent and determination to make that dream come true. That for them, it's not about, okay, you give me a goal and I'm going to go figure out how to do the partnerships that you have in the transactor. The builder is somebody, that's why I said they've got the talent, they've got the creative power, they've got the determination to bring those ideas and make them into a reality. And I think that becomes an incredibly important part of this because in many cases, if you just are the change catalyst where you want to get in there, you want to put order to things, but you don't have kind of a builder subclass to you, if you don't have the ability to figure out how to really dream up what it's going to be and to be able to get in and do that and to have that entrepreneurial spirit, you're really going to struggle. Because I think that actually this is one of the biggest things that I see most leaders struggle with, is that they don't have a builder subclass in them. They don't have that kind of entrepreneurial spirit. They're too accepting of just the way the company is. They're too accepting of the way things are, and they need a little bit more of that. Now, as we move into relationship as a category really just sort of has one section to it, which is the coach. And the coach is, just as you would expect, it's leadership as a form of people development, right? Like, these are people who know how to get the best out of people. They create really high-performing teams and high-performing cultures. They know how to nurture people's skills. They're almost that sort of, a little bit of the inverse of a deal maker or a transactor, right? Like, a transactor is going out making deals with everybody else, and they're looking outward. The coach is looking inward. The coach is looking and saying, okay, look, what is going on with my team? How do I develop them? How do I really sort of get the best out of what they're doing? Now, from there, we move into the kind of the change style, and the change is going to have two here as well. The first one is the strategist, and the strategist really thinks about leadership almost like it's a game of chess, right? They're actually pretty good at dealing with surprise developments. They're good at dealing with issues, and they're able to still sort of maintain or correct the vision and the direction. These are the people that they provide the vision. They provide the strategic direction. They can do that sort of outside of the box thinking to create new organizational forms and generate that sort of future growth. And I think that these are the people that really are almost kind of that blend of a change catalyst and a builder. But in most cases, like I said, they're able to bring a little bit of a longer vision. They're able to bring a little bit more strategy, whereas the change catalyst can just bring the structure and the builder can just sort of bring the heart. The strategist really sort of blends the both of those, because it's somebody who really can think about, great, how are we going to get this done? And then the other part is, whenever you think about change, is being a communicator. And a communicator is really leadership as, presentation, stage manager, something like that, right? Like, these are people that are really great influencers, and they have a real impact on their surroundings. These are the people that, you almost find them like magnetic. They're so articulate. They have a really positive impact on the company, because there's somebody who can go out and communicate the vision authentically. They can go out and communicate what's going on. They can get the team more power. They can get them to break through. It's really something where, again, that's really the one thing that they're good at, is going out and communicating. Now, the last one, and I think this is the one that everyone aspires to, very, very few people, I think, actually attain, which is in the creativity style, is the innovator. And this is leadership as creative idea generation, right? Like, you are focused on the new. You can solve extremely difficult problems and generate new ideas. You are just this fire hose of creativity. And that's really what it is you're looked at. That whenever somebody needs a new idea, whenever they need a new approach, whenever they need something like that, they're going to the innovator. That's the person that they're really looking for. Now, it's like I said, we go back and look at the descriptions for these, because there's some sort of overlap. There's a bit of nuance between each one of these. And again, I would start to think about, whenever you think about your style, are you much more prone to bring order to something? Are you much more prone to just be action-oriented? Are you more about relationships? Are you more about creating change? Are you more about creating creativity? Now, again, you may say yes to a number of those, but when you think about which one is the dominant one, which one do you want the most, that's the one I would start with. And like I said, I think I would look at what is the one dominant and then kind of the two supporting, almost like kind of subclasses underneath that you would use to, you think, are really going to define your leadership style. Because the idea here is that whenever, again, you're able to understand what level you are, you're able to understand, really what style you are, then the thing that you can start to do is to start to look for, what do you need as a complement? What sort of other leadership should you bring onto your team? What sort of leadership should you work with? A lot of those other sort of things can become really, really important, because that's the thing. Don't try to be all of them, right? Like, can you be little bits of it? Sure. Are you going to be dominant and really good at all of them? No, you are not. And so just get that idea straight out of your head right now, right? Like, you're not going to be all five. You shouldn't be all five. You can't be all five. I've never met anybody who was all five. And that's what I said, is it's just, you need to narrow in on a certain part of this. But style is great. And I think that in a lot of those cases, the thing that we've really looked at so far has been very introspective. It's been about, what is your level of maturity? What is your style of leadership? But the other thing that I've really sort of discovered is that even if you understand your style, even if you understand your maturity, the way that you communicate that is a whole nother variable. Because I've seen so many leaders who have the right message with the wrong delivery, right? Because I think that's, your style is about how you lead, how effective you are with your team. But this is that other part of the equation. And I think that in many cases, it's often really overlooked. And, I know that I have struggled with this, where it's like if you kind of get somebody who's one particular style that is very results oriented, that is very, kind of driven to always get something done, that doesn't care about the emotionality, that doesn't put a lot of thought or rationalization behind something. And you're somebody that's more about heart, that's more about people, that's more about the why. You're going to butt heads all the time. You're never going to see eye to eye. Even again, even if you step back and took emotion out of it, you both might be violently aligned on what it is you're trying to do. But again, the way that you're communicating it to each other, you're not being thoughtful about your audience. And as a result, it really screws things up to the point where it can become really detrimental. So here again, I've done a lot of work, done a lot of research, and a bunch of different things like this. And the framework that I like the best comes from Atlassian. If you don't know who Atlassian is, if you do not read their blog called On Work, if you do not look at what they do, this is one of the very best companies in understanding how to build great teams and how to build great cultures. Whenever you actually look at what they do, they will talk about things like design imposter syndrome in the onboarding into the company. Jürgen, who is their head of design, is one of the smartest people I have ever met. So again, if you do not know who Atlassian is and look at the actual work that they do on the cultural side, not just on the product side, you are missing out. But this is their framework. And for them, they sort of mapped out it, and I really like this. There are basically 4 communication styles. There's dominant, influencer, conscientious, and steady. Now, what I'm going to do for all of this, right, because all of this came out of research I've taken from a lot of different places, kind of mashed it up, put it together, overlaid my experience. I'm going to put in the show notes kind of all these different things. I'm going to put a bunch of books to be able to check out. I'm going to put this sort of graph and all this sort of different thing. Because whenever you talk about that dominant, influencer, conscientious, and steady, they do it on a 2-dimensional graph, right? Like think about your old days in geometry, like that sort of XY, kind of chart. And the way that they do it is that on the horizontal, it moves from being task-oriented to people-oriented. And on the vertical, it moves at the top from being excitable to the bottom of being even-keeled. So the top left, which would be very task-oriented and very excitable, is dominant. Top right, which is excitable and people-oriented, would be influencer. Bottom left, task-oriented and even-keeled, is conscientious. Bottom right, which would be people-oriented and even-keeled, is steady. Now, the reason why I think this is important is because I think it's not only important for you to understand what is your communication style, but to think about, for the people who you work with, the people on your team, what is their style. Because you need to try to think about how do you communicate to them, how to communicate in a way that is going to be effective, that is going to, again, not get into this bullshit about who is right. I'm going to beat this drum until the day I die, right? Because it's not that. But so let's kind of run through these 4. Like dominance. Again, the name sort of sums it up. But dominants are these people who love action, right? Like they're focused on results. That for them, they prefer to think about the big picture and kind of leave the implementation and the details to other people. I think that it's one of these things like patience and sensitivity are something they can do, but in many cases it requires some amount of effort. And I think that, this is one of those things that if you work with them, some of the things you really want to try, right? Like try to get down to business. Try to stay on topic. And I think the other thing is be prepared that these people are going to have follow-up questions. And you need to be able to really come up with answers that you can say with confidence, because they're going to tell if you are making it up, to be able to know about this. And I think that this is one of those things you need to expect them to be decisive and in many cases probably decently blunt. And the other thing to avoid with them, right, is taking their bluntness and sort of either having a problem with it or kind of thinking that they're being impatient, because that's not necessarily what it is. It's just they want to get things done. Definitely don't make promises you can't deliver on, right? Again, a lot of this, and especially for dominance, because these are task-oriented people, it's about how do you get things done. It's really about that. And I think that, these are people that, again, are going to be decisive and kind of efficient. They're going to be results-oriented. They're going to be probably tolerant of risk, right? Like they're going to be fine if you want to go take a risk. They're going to be okay if you want to be able to go and do something, but just be honest about it. Now, I start with this persona because this is me, right? Like if you have ever worked with me, that is a description of it, right? Because it's like I like to make decisions. I like to be efficient. I can be a little emotional and a little bit intense at times. But again, I trust people. I try to kind of balance that out and to kind of maybe be a little bit more towards the people oriented or a little bit more in the middle of that and not just the straight task oriented. But like I said, that's one of the ones that I really identify with. Now, the influencer, these are the kind of the excited, a little bit more people-oriented person. And these are the people that they're just the classic people, right? Like they're the ones that they're friendly, they're upbeat, they're like always knowing what's going on. They're really all about that interpersonal relationship, which really oftentimes makes them great collaborators. And I think, for them, long-term focus and follow-through aren't their strong suits, right? So I think what you want to do is like engage them in like short collaborative bursts. And that's why I said for me, again, that's where I'm sort of sit kind of on the line between dominant and influencer, because I have that problem of like, I'm really good at the big picture. I'm good at details to a point, but like the details and that long-term thing just start to kind of grind me down. Again, I'm not that like super upbeat, super like I'm kind of an introverted extrovert, so that's not completely true. So again, I think you can be a dominant and kind of a secondary or sit on the line for some of these. But for influencers, these are the people like whenever you're talking about what you want to try to do with them, try to approach them and be casual. Like let your sense of humor show, put details and facts in writing, right? Because they're going to want to refer back to that. They aren't always just going to want to kind of stick to like what you talked about. And I think, in some cases, and this is where I don't think I'm an influencer, because I think that they can get maybe a little bit too optimistic about ideas as well as their own abilities and the abilities of those around them, right? Like sometimes they just get a little bit too like, we can go run through any wall. Again, there's got to be some reality there. And again, I think, the things you want to avoid with influencers, like don't talk down to them, don't be short, don't be temperamental with them. Trying to confine the conversation is not going to work. And I think, these are people you're going to really want to expect them to dive deep into the details with you. Because, remember, these are outgoing, enthusiastic, relation-oriented, optimistic. Like, they want to hear what you're feeling. They want to hear, what's really going on with you. So that's something that they're really going to lean into. Now, people who are steady, right? And steady is that sort of like even-keeled, people-oriented. So, if influencer is top right, steady is bottom right. That, steady is about emphasizing cooperation, right? And by doing that, they like to do it in a way that doesn't upset things. It's not going to change too much, right? Like these are people, they want consistency, they want stability, they want loyalty. And, you'll often find them, many cases, in like either team support or customer support roles, right? So you get a lot of people in project management, a lot of producers, a lot of that sort of like, let's just sort of keep the trains running. That doesn't mean, though, right? That doesn't mean that they're inflexible, because I think these are people that can adapt quickly because they have to. But they may need a little bit of extra encouragement along the way to deal with some of that change, especially if there's a lot of it. So for them, the things that you want to try, right? Like really try to practice active listening, because these are people that they want to feel like you've heard them. And so again, like it's a really good idea to like summarize what they've said and like read it back to them. Whenever you approach them, try to be relaxed, because again, since they want to be steady, if you come up, you're all jittery, you're all over the place, you're really emotional, not going to work, right? And again, I think that's one of those things that you need to think about. And here again, steady people are going to expect them to ask about the details, right? Because for them, they're very even-keeled, but that's really what they want to do. Now, what you want to avoid with them, don't push them into a decision too fast. They want to sort of think about things. And assuming that they support an idea 100%, just because they didn't voice an opposition is not true, right? Because again, these are people that are going to be a little bit more steady state. And so again, you're going to need to approach them, right? Like you need to prompt their input. And again, you need to be able to know that the biggest things that are going to matter to them are going to be priorities and deadlines. So whenever you talk about those things, be clear and spell them out. Now, as we get to the last one of conscientious, these are task-oriented, even-keeled people. I always feel like these are kind of the furthest, at least, from who I am. These are the people that, like, for them, it's about precision and a really high value on competency, right? Like, they jump at the chance to demonstrate their expertise, to build new skills. Like, they're just that sort of person you're likely to find who's like an engineer, a data scientist, they're maybe more of like an analyst, something like that. And it's not that they're not unfriendly, right? They're not people like, they're just going to take a while to be able to warm up to, right? Like, don't expect them to ask you about your weekend plans. Like, they're there to do something. They're there to accomplish something they're there for. They're very conscientious about what that is. So here again, when you work with them, like, try to provide as many details as possible up front. Like, organize and be as systematic as you can. Give them clear expectations and space to work independently, because conscientious people, again, want to be able to have that space where they tend to be a little bit more of a loner, right? And expect them to double and triple check everything before making a decision. Where, creatives people that, again, the ones that are more in that dominant role, like, you're just like, great, this is what we're going to do and we'll correct it as we go. They want to think about it, double check it, triple check it, make sure that that's that sort of thing. And so again, it tends to be the opposites, right? So again, like, a dominant and a conscientious are going to struggle there, because the dominant wants to be decisive. And here again, someone who is conscientious wants to think about and take their time. Now, the things to avoid with people who are conscientious, like, avoid framing the feedback on their work as criticism. Now, again, I know this can get to be a little millennial. This can be a little bit of that sort of like, everything's got to be wonderful. That's not what I'm saying, right? It's make it a conversation, not a statement. Because I think the thing is, when you respond to them emotionally, you need to use words like know or think as opposed to words like feel. Because again, they're dealing much more in absolutes. They're dealing in things that are very well thought out. Feelings become too squishy of a subject, right? And these are not the people that like are going to kind of drop down next to you at lunch and do a bunch of chit chat, right? Like, that's not what they're up for. But I think that's the thing. I'm going to post the article to where Atlassian actually walks kind of through all of this on their blog. It's a really, really good structure. It's a really good framework. But I think that, the point of all of this, the sort of masterclass in this kind of extended level episode, is like to just think about, how do you find your style? How do you find your maturity? How do you find your communication? But also, whenever you do that, figure out, how do you kind of find your squad, right? Because I think the best companies, the best teams that I see, are full of this sort of like self-aware leaders. And these people are able to band together, right? They're able to be distributive. They're able to kind of be collective whenever they need to be. They're able to be complementary to each other, right? Like, those sort of things, whenever they're able to come together, are what really make the team work so well. Because the other part of leadership that I think needs to be dispelled is that this is not a singular concept. There is never a single leader. Like, even if you are the CEO, the grand poobah, like, whatever the hell you want to call it, right? That's not just about that one person. It's about, how does that person work with their direct reports? How do those direct reports work with everybody else? It's about this sort of team concept. So yes, there's an individual that you need to have an awareness and a style part of this too. But as you think about communication, so much of this, to me, the best teams, the best leaders, the best creativity comes out of people and teams that are deliberate. They are deliberate in understanding their style. They are deliberate in understanding the way they communicate. They are deliberate in understanding their maturity level, and they have open conversations about this. The teams that I work with that are the most dysfunctional, the leaders that I work with who are the most fucked up, are the ones that do not have any of this. They have no self-awareness and understanding of how their team actually thinks about them. They have no understanding of, how does the company see them? They have no understanding of how do other leaders complement them? Where do they stop and other people start? And that's the thing that I've never understood, because I think as we look at the way we do our work, as we look at the way that we create, so many things that we do are so deliberate. But when it comes to interpersonal skills, whenever it comes to ourselves, we are just so like, fuck it, right? Like, just see what happens. And that's not the way this works. You need to find your level, find your leadership style, find your communication style, right? Because change happens in people and in organizations through conversation and education, not through accusation and not through judgment. This is why I keep coming back to that concept about, it's not about who's right. Who is right is about accusation and about judgment. And that's the thing. Whenever you do those, nobody learns, nobody grows, nothing gets better. Just a lot of people feel bad, and one person feels better for a short amount of time and then realizes they're being alienated and not supported. But that's what I said, is I think a lot of what's in here came from a lot of other really, really smart people. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to post like some of the books that I've gone, some of these articles, some recommended reading in the show notes, right? Like, if you want to go in and you want to dig deeper into this, I would highly, highly recommend going into that. But like I said, this is also something that is going to be constantly evolving, because that's going to be the problem is, you may be a 5 on the leadership level at your last company. Whenever you leave, you may then become a 1 and have to start all over again. So this is also not a steady state, that just because you're a 5, you're not going to be a 5 for forever. You may be a 5 at your last company and a 2 at the one you're at right now, and that those sort of things, those sort of changes are just going to be a part of what goes on with this whole sort of, I don't know what, roller coaster that we're all on. So as usual, hopefully this helped. If you have questions, please reach out. That's one of the things I really like, are the conversations that happen after some of these episodes. But like I said before, look, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so that you're sure you get those episodes whenever you come out. Leave a review whenever you're there. But yeah, head over to thecrazy1.com. It's thecrazy1.com. I'm going to post all the show notes from this. I'm going to post the articles and the books and the charts and a whole bunch of those other things like that, so you can check those out. Like, follow me on any of the social media channels. I'm on Twitter, I'm on Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn, I don't know what, a bunch of other ones anyway. Like, just, you can reach out through there. The show has got the Facebook page. Any of these places are great places to reach out if you've got questions. And then finally, as I say every time, that the people down in legal want me to remind you that the views here are just my own. They don't represent any of my current or former employers. These are always just my thoughts. And finally, I say it every time because I mean it every time, but thank you for your time. I'm always incredibly humbled that you want to spend any time listening to me talk. So, until next time, and go out, take a look at this. It might be uncomfortable, it might be difficult, but it is so incredibly necessary. And remember, while you do it, stay crazy.